Right. Okay. So let's move further with Charles Taylor and his idea of contextualized self-interpretations. I mean, and I think this whole engagement is part of our concern with trying to address the interpretive dimension of the social sciences, and then revisit the articulations for the interpretive dimension of the social sciences, right? This is part of a larger engagement with the dimensions of understanding which emphasize the hermeneutical basis of social science, right? That and as I indicated at the very outset of the last class, I mean, there have been a proliferation of hermeneutic approaches to social science across a domains of inquiry in the social sciences and the humanities. And I have, for purposes of our presentation, zeroed in on one important articulation of the hermeneutical basis of social sciences coming in the writings of Charles Taylor, right? And I think he's a good choice and a fairly exemplary scholar, continues to contribute to scholarship today, and among the leading philosophers even today, to this day, right? Now, I was at a point where I was looking at the key features in Taylor's engagement with the hermeneutic basis of social sciences, right? And I tried to indicate for you in the last class, right, that the key to Taylor's assertion of the hermeneutic alternative for the social sciences is not quite only to emphasize that human agents are self-interpreting beings. I think he's also making a further claim, okay, that these self-interpretations of agents, themselves demand interpretation, right? Okay, so in speaking of the hermeneutic basis of social science, right, he's forwarding the idea of contextualized self-interpretations, right? Okay. Okay, and I've indicated in the last class that when we speak of contextualized self-interpretations, one is talking about certain conditions, for interpreting self-interpretations, right? And I think we will be addressing these conditions more fully in today's class, but I've already set the terms for you in the last class, right? So Taylor is saying, and please note, whenever people speak about the interpretive basis of social science or forward the idea of interpretive social science, they speak about privileging the actor's point of view or the agent's point of view, right? Okay, but then what Taylor is telling us, right, is that there is more to interpretation than simply adopting the agent's point of view, right? Etc. And I gave you in the last class a certain philosophical backdrop in which this claim has to be understood in terms of the distinction between explanandum and explanans, and Taylor is very clear, right, that the self-interpretations of actors, right, constitute this basic subject matter of the social sciences. So they are the things to be explained, right? And there are things. I mean, if agent self-descriptions are things to be explained, then they cannot become a factor in their own explanation, right? So there is something more than taking the agent's point of view in interpretation and so on, right? So in fact, the tendency within a lot of social science is to confuse the explanans and the explananda, the thing which is to be explained, and the the process of explaining, right, etc. Okay, what is to be explained and what is doing the explaining, and there is a tendency to conflate the two. And Taylor is saying that no, we need to keep these apart, right, etc. And in keeping the explanans and the explanandum apart, he's trying to actually concretize the idea that there is more to interpretation than simply adopting the agent's point of view, right? Now, why is Taylor asserting this point? And that's where I move into the next slide, which is titled Contextualized Self-Interpretations, right? Okay. So what you can clearly see, right, that what Taylor is drawing attention to within the model of interpretive social science is to the ways in which self-interpretations of agents themselves demand interpretation, right? Okay. In other words, self-interpretations, the meanings that actors give for their actions, themselves need to be contextualized if they have to be grasped and or explained, right, etc. So, and I think you can clearly see that Taylor is highlighting something very, very important as a basic reorientation within the interpretive perspective, right? So he's drawing attention, as I say it in the slide, that from within interpretive social science, you should focus on the ways in which self-interpretations themselves demand interpretation. So it's one thing to take the self-interpretations of actors as given. It's quite another to actually explain why actors provide the kind of self-interpretations that they do, right, etc. Okay. Now, why is Taylor emphasizing this, right? And I think the reason why Taylor is highlighting the point that he is, is because he does recognize that if you have to understand the self-interpretations of actors or self-descriptions of actors, you have to make sense of agents through their self-descriptions, right? So there is no way you can understand human behavior outside of the self-descriptions that actors give, right? Okay, but this is not sufficient, right, to make sense of the action, okay, because very often the agent, the actor, may be confused, may be ill-informed, okay, or contradictory in their goals and actions, and so on, right? So Taylor is marking out a specific demand within an interpretive social science, which, even as it addresses the self-descriptions given by actors, does not yield explanations that culminate only with those self-descriptions. In fact, in the last class, in the end of the last class, Taylor had, I told that Taylor is asserting what he is because he wants social sciences or the interpretive view to avoid two equal and opposite mistakes, right? One, interpretive social science cannot ignore the self-descriptions of actors, right? And it would be a mistake if it ignores the self-descriptions of actors, right? And secondly, okay, even as it takes the self-descriptions of actors into account, it cannot accord ultimate determinacy and seriousness, ultimacy to those self-descriptions, right, etc. Okay, so I mean, to give ultimacy to those self-descriptions is according to Taylor to make them incorrigible. That means that people are always, agents are always correct in what descriptions they offer of their actions, right? And Taylor is saying this need not be true, right? and so on, right? That's why Taylor is pointing out that while making sense of agents does require taking into account their self-descriptions, this may not be sufficient to make sense of the actions, because very often the agents may be confused and so on, or wrong, and so on, right? That's why Taylor is saying that an interpretive social science, is not or cannot be reduced to just adopting the agent's point of view, right, etc. Now, in fact, to reduce the interpretive social science to the agent's point of view amounts to what Taylor calls as the incorrigibility thesis, right? And when you read his essay, especially Understanding and Ethnocentricity, he makes these points very, very clear, right? I mean, if the interpretive social science is more than the agent's point of view, then that's one way by which the incorrigibility thesis is avoided, right? Etc. And what is the incorrigibility thesis? That understanding the agent involves adopting his or her point of view or description and accounting for what an agent does in their own terms, right? Taylor is not saying that you cannot take their terms, you ignore their terms altogether. You should take them into account, but there is more than to be done at the level of interpretation than just taking the agent's point of view. And I'm repeating this point because in a lot of the ideas about qualitative social science, there is always a focus on meanings. There is always a focus on what agents do, what agents say about their actions. But there is a certain reduction involved in reducing qualitative social science just to what agents do or say that they do, etc. Right? In fact, according to Taylor, right, the incorrigibility thesis, right, and he's against this. The incorrigibility thesis actually cripples the force of an interpretive social science, or cripples the challenges before an interpretive social science, right? In fact, to give in to the incorrigibility thesis, right, is to make interpretive social science very, very commonplace, banal, unilluminating, right? But more than that, right, it also amounts to a logical conflation where the explanandum, what is to be explained, is confused with what is doing the explaining, the explanans, right? So logically, too, not just in terms of reducing the possibilities of interpretive social science, even logically, there is a problem in modeling the interpretive social sciences exclusively and reducing them only to the agent's point of view, right? Now, so please note, and I'm stressing this, and I've stressed this also in my handout, in my PPT, that we cannot bypass the agent's point of view. You cannot the agent's self-descriptions, right, cannot be bypassed altogether. In fact, according to Taylor, the tendency to bypass the agent's point of view or the agent's self-descriptions is actually a temptation when you model social sciences on the natural sciences. So that's a temptation to be avoided. Rather, what Taylor is saying Okay, you know, you know, that even as what is to be explained, right, is derived from the agent's self-descriptions, right? The exponents, okay, you know, cannot be presented in the same terms, right? So, etc. So it's a kind of a, I mean, if that conflation is to be avoided, what is to be explained and what is doing the explaining, right, etc., then somewhere along the way, even as you take into account agent self-descriptions, those self-descriptions are not just explained through those self-descriptions themselves. You will have to attribute other layers of meaning and interpretation to make sense of the self-interpretations of actors, etc. Before I move ahead, are there any clarifications? Because I have definitely moved ahead from the last class, although all the terms were set in the last class, and I rehearsed it at the beginning of this class, and then I moved ahead. But are there any questions or clarifications that any of you might have? And I don't mind spending some time, you know, trying to clarify this ground of Taylor. I think it's sufficiently lucid in itself, etc. But I'm, you know, even as you might understand what Taylor is indicating towards, or what my summation of Taylor is indicating towards, I think the significance of his point may elude you, and I want you all to speak and you know, clarify any doubts that you might have. Please do so. If there are any questions.
Sir?
Yes.
Sir, in this case, we are actually looking from the perspective of the researcher here, right? How much of the age?
Sorry?
So here we are actually looking from the perspective of the researcher, right? How much of the agent's self-description should be taken into account and so on. So it's from the perspective of the researcher, right?
No. But go ahead. Let me hear you out.
So what I was thinking is, like, how do we look at the concept of agency of the individual? Does it play a role here in our understanding?
Yeah, no, Rose, I think this is not privileging the researcher side of the researched equation. I think he's trying to balance out between the priorities of the researcher, right, and also the demands of the research situation, of something that is being researched, right? Of course, there are larger questions involved, and I think what you're indicating towards or hinting at is the larger question, because if you believe that agent self-descriptions are you know, I mean, one can always say that the self-descriptions, that the descriptions that researchers give of researched actions is greater than the agent's self-descriptions, right? There is that possibility, right? But Taylor is not saying that, okay? Although somebody can interpret by saying that his position that agents may be ill-informed, actors may be ignorant, right, etc., right? You know, they may not have a clear idea of what they are doing, right? They may be confusing themselves. Is giving the balance back to the researcher and putting certain challenges before the researcher. I agree that, right? But what Taylor is saying is that, look, it is a possibility that actors can be confused, right? I mean, you cannot deny that it's possible that agent self-descriptions may be based on, problematic criteria. I mean, again, somebody might ask, who defines what is problematic, right? I agree, right? There is an open-endedness to it, but I think the larger thrust, I mean, the crux of the point is that the interpretive social science, because whenever we think of interpretive social science, we take into account the agent's point of view. That means the agent's point of view is the only authentic point of view on the action. Now, Taylor is saying, no, the agent's point of view cannot be bypassed, but there is more to interpretive social science than just bypassing the agent's point of view, right? So of course, there are larger questions that remain, right? But before we enter into those larger questions, it's important to get a sense of what Taylor is highlighting for us, right? Yes, you're right in saying that in terms of what he is saying, there is a tendency to give more to the researcher than the agent. So you can always say that Taylor's interpretive social science amounts to, or can amount to, denying the agency of the actor, right? But that's a critical point. You'll have to justify it because surely Taylor is not saying that, right? But in terms of the injunctions that he is specifying, this can translate into a consequence. I agree, right? But is that a fair criticism of Taylor? I keep that open. Does this help? I'll come to you, Revati, just a minute. Just a moment. Is that clear, Rose?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So he's trying to strike a balance from the extreme end. He's trying to pull it to the middle ground.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if that is your, okay. I mean, no, I see. This is, this middle ground. It's an extremely problematic category for me, right? I mean, it's easy to say middle ground, right? It's very easy to say because but many times when you have extreme positions articulated, right, it is very difficult to search for a middle ground, right? When the positions are extremist, so to say, right? Of course, you can always say, no, the extremist positions need to be tempered, and then we can find a middle ground. But it's not often in practice very easy because people are stuck with their positions on things, right? In which case, the focus, should not be the middle ground, but something else. You need to have a different posing of the problem, right? That's why Taylor is saying that, look, yes, modeling the social sciences on the natural sciences is a problem, okay, right? Because the incorrigibility thesis underlies that modeling, right, etc. And somewhere along the way, you need to move beyond, right, etc. So in moving beyond the modeling of natural sciences, social sciences on the natural sciences, do you move into taking the terms of the incorrigibility thesis more seriously, right? So you focus on the agent, yes, right, etc. But again, in focusing and giving ultimate priority to the agent, you may still not be understanding their actions. That's what Taylor is talking about, right? So Taylor is not only targeting the positivist definition of the social sciences, he's also targeting certain models of interpretive social science which reduce themselves only to self-descriptions of actors, right? etc. So he's actually, treading a very different ground of recovery, and not just articulating a middle position. But if you have recuperated it like a middle position, it's okay. I mean, you can make sense of what is being said. Yes, Revati. Sorry.
That's okay. So I wanted to know, so in some sense, can we say that when Taylor is saying that agents may be confused or wrong in their self-interpretation or self-description, but we still need to give it value, in some sense, can we say that he's saying that there is value in learning why a actor is saying that something is the way that it is, even if it is wrong? Like there is obviously something, some underlying factors going into why they are coming up with a certain explanation or interpretation, and the reason behind that, whether it's correct or incorrect, is also important for us to understand as social scientists.
That's right. That's precisely the point. Because why if actors are giving interpretations or self-descriptions that the researcher conceives to be ill-informed, right, etc., then somewhere he has to come up with an explanation for why actors come up with those descriptions.
Right.
You're right. Right. Incidentally, if you're looking at dialectics, right? I mean, if you're looking at both Hegelian dialectics and its alteration in Marx, this was precisely the point. When Marx altered the Hegelian dialectics, put it back on its feet, as he put it, he was saying that people may misunderstand their social situation, right? But you still have to explain why they misunderstand their social situation, right? Etc. Okay, so there is not only a recognition that people may be mistaken, you also have to explain why they think that they are not mistaken, right? People think that they are not mistaken, right? Etc. Of course, this is in a Marxian slant, and somebody might ask, is Marx being hermeneutic? Therefore, I mean, and there are larger theoretical questions involved there. But I think in terms of his intellectual practice of a certain thematics of reading, there is something hermeneutical even in a Marxist form of practice, right? But you're absolutely right in saying that the task of the social scientist, right, is to make sense of actors' descriptions and then explain why actors project those self-descriptions and not others. Yeah.
So can we say that this also then connects with the discussion that we were having about different conceptions of reality, that there is a reality that exists out there objectively, but different communities and different groups of people can have different interpretations of that reality based on like cultural tendencies or whatever. So can we tie into that also, because different human actors will have different interpretations of different events?
Right. Yes. No, but I think, I mean, to be fair to Taylor and others, or at least they would also try to ward off the relativist conclusion, right? Because what you are suggesting, which is correct in a manner of speaking, can translate into a form of relativism, right? That there are many truths about what is there, that there are multiple truths about what is there, right? Taylor will not deny that there can be multiple truths, right? Okay, but he will also argue that those multiple truths, those multiple perspectives have to be evaluated. And you can say that certain perspectives are closer to the truth, than others, right? And okay, but again, that's why Taylor is a pluralist, not a relativist. I mean, it's one thing to affirm that everything is true, that there are multiple truths and everything is true and valid. It's quite another to point out that among the multiple truths that are true and valid, there are some which are closer to revealing the state of affairs and more seminal than others. So that's why, I mean, even if I might agree with what you have suggested, Revati, I might still ask you to be a little cautionary, because what the position you were articulating or stating for us can translate into a form of relativism that a lot of hermeneutic social science will also seek to avoid, right? But please note, there is always a challenge of relativism involved in hermeneutic social sciences or in an interpretive social sciences, right? There is always a challenge of relativism. How do you mediate between multiple articulations of reality, right? How do we mediate between them is a larger challenge. And I think these are issues which, Taylor is conscious of. And I think we can return to this question of relativism later, because Taylor will speak later of, getting beyond ethnocentricity, right? Etc. And then he will also speak of a fusion of horizons. He will speak of strong evaluations. And I'll come to that in the latter part of this lecture or in the next class. Yeah?
Yes, thank you, sir.
Right. Any other questions? Any other clarifications? I mean, it helps to clarify these matters, not just for yourself, but also for the rest of the class. And please remember that I'm looking for, cues. I mean, if it was a physical class, I mean, even if you all were silent, I would still get a sense of what's going on and, make efforts at reaching out, right? But I have no such, cues being offered unless you begin to speak up and so on. And I'm giving time for people to, move in and engage the ground that I have rehearsed till now, and so on, right? Okay, now let me, can I move ahead? Shall I move ahead? Any other doubts, any clarifications? And please, I mean,
Sir,
yes, Siri.
sir, I was just thinking about if you could comment on the idea of importance of psychoanalysis in this regard, especially since we talk about ascertaining reasons about why certain position is important or why someone said something. So I was just thinking if psychoanalysis does play a part in this idea at all, if at all.
Yeah. No, that's a interesting question, Manasa, and I think there is a sense in which within the psychoanalytical framework, the conversation between the analyst and the object being analyzed, I mean the patient, etc., it can translate into a hermeneutic situation, right? But please note, there are also tendencies within the psychoanalytical framework to explain certain states of affairs in a particular kind of a way. So you describe the patient as having or nursing certain kinds of illusions or delusions about themselves and so on, right? There is something repressive. I mean, if you go by the traditions of psychoanalysis that, for instance, Freud spoke about, or the kind of revisions that to the Freudian corpus that came from Lacan and others and so on, right? So I think so I'm willing to grant that there is an interpretive situation involved in psychoanalysis, particularly when the analyst is confronting the analyzed, right? But there is also a tendency to describe certain kinds of representations in terms of the certain categories coming from the theorist's repertoire, right? Etc. Maybe in certain situations, the psychoanalyst is able to hold a mirror to the patient and alleviate him or her of certain illusions or delusions or anxieties and so on, okay, etc. But there is always a certain objectifying tendency you can read into psychoanalytic theory, an objectifying tendency, right? Incidentally, there's something unique about psychoanalysis, that its objectifying tendency also takes the question of human subjectivity very seriously, right? Etc. So there are so while the basic situation involving psychoanalysis, I mean, as represented by an encounter between the analyst and the patient or the analysand is involved, it's an interpretive situation. There are certain kinds of demands that are placed within the terms of that encounter that may render the hermeneutic impulse that underlies that encounter restricted, right? Does that, I mean, am I comprehensible, Manasa?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Right. So I'm not giving you an answer. I'm not giving you an answer completely. I want to keep it a little open-ended. I'm willing to grant that there is, Amrutraj, I'll come to you. I'm willing to grant that there is something hermeneutic in that situation, in a psychoanalytical situation, okay. But there are also other prerequisites and conditions and demands that are placed into that situation that makes that situation a little more problematic and not comprehensible merely through the hermeneutic lens. Yes, Amrutraj.
Yes,
I mean, is that okay? I mean,
Yes, sir.
I'm not giving you I want to keep the field open, and then we can carry on this conversation through email.
Got
and
it,
so
sir.
on.
Thank you. Yes.
Amrutraj?
Sir, while saying, you mentioned about pluralism and relativism, but while saying some perspectives are more, more nearer to the truth or nearer to that object, there is a power in. There is a power involved, right, sir? Because like when you say some things are nearer and some things are far.
Yeah, of course.
So, so while when one say the agent's self-descriptions are not enough, but they are important, but they are not enough. There is so much power involved to say like that, right?
Sure. No. Nobody will deny that. Nobody will deny that. And I think in partly when I was answering to Rose, I kept that stream, that possibility open. That in saying that the agent's point of view may not be sufficient to explain the action, right? There is always a tendency to read more into the situation coming from the analytic apparatus of the researcher and so on. And there could be a subtle power dynamics involved. Nobody will deny that, right? But the point is, I think there is a, I mean, I think it's important first to receive this position, right? And what is the backdrop against which this position is highlighting its claims, right? And when you receive it against this backdrop of the kind of claims that it is trying to ward off, then there is something that Taylor is offering which is important for us. And I think it makes our understanding of qualitative social science, I mean, and you have had courses on qualitative methods and so on, but I'm not sure that in getting into qualitative methodology, one has actually addressed what are the problems and possibilities built into the qualitative method, right? And what Taylor's offering us is a way of addressing the problems and possibilities of the interpretive social science, or more, I mean, if I have to use a vocabulary which is something that you all are more familiar through the course structure, qualitative methods, and so on. The other question, and so one is not denying the power dimension. Incidentally, there is a wonderful essay by Charles Taylor on Foucault, right? And most of our modern, I mean, at least our contemporary theories of power pay obeisance to Foucault, right? Of course, there is more than Foucault involved in the contemporary theories of power. But Taylor has an actually extremely interesting take on Foucault's attempt to think about knowledge and power and freedom and truth in the context of knowledge and power, right? And I mean, you can source it on Google, Amrutraj, and if you have any clarifications to be sought on the basis of reading that essay, you can email me and we can have a conversation and so on. So it's, I mean, to be charging Taylor with ignoring, I mean, I'm not saying that your questions are amounting to that, but I think it's important to point out that what is the larger context in which Taylor is forwarding the claims that he is offering. There is something problematic about them, I'm not denying that, but there are also certain interesting possibilities that enunciation is forwarding, and that's what I'm trying to remind you about. But let me come back to another point that I mean, you were partly alluding to. See, I think whenever we think about challenges to I mean absolute forms of absolutism, and I mean, or I mean, many times forms of universalism can translate into absolutism, right? That there is only one truth, right? So in challenging the idea of one truth, we move into relativism by saying that no, there are many truths, right? Etc. But the problem, I mean, while relativism is definitely a more challenging position than rigid universalism or forms of absolutism, right? Etc. I think it's important that relativism also be assessed on its own terms, right? And when you begin to assess relativism on its own terms, you will find that what relativism does is it suspends judgment, right? It suspends, the call between multiple articulations of truth, right? It says that everything is valid, everything is equally valid. Now, I think a pluralist position is a little more interesting because it says that even though there are multiple truths, a pluralist position will try to mediate between these multiple truths, right? And if you want to get a measure of what Taylor is saying on these questions, I think you should read his essay, The Politics of Recognition, right? Etc. Again, this is part of the a larger debate in political theory about multiculturalism and the politics of recognition, the identity politics, and so on. I mean, what is called as identity politics, Taylor reframes as politics of recognition, right, etc. So and I think he makes some very interesting comments in that, and there are some fertile dialogues on these positions. So that's why I'm saying that while and I was also indicating this partly in answering Revati's question, was that look, there can be multiple. I think the idea of saying that there can be multiple affirmations of truth is definitely a more suggestive theoretical and political position. Nevertheless, it's also important to actually think further with these multiple articulations of truth, and then arrive at more precise judgments about these multiple truths, etc. So that's why it becomes more interesting to actually think think philosophically with forms of pluralism. Okay, and Taylor is that's why I said Taylor is an exemplary figure in trying to think about the practice of philosophy under conditions of pluralism, etc. In fact, one of the books dedicated to Taylor, the corpus of his work by James Tully and somebody else, is called Philosophy in the Age of Pluralism, which is reviewing the work of Charles Taylor. And Charles Taylor responds to all the people who engage with his work, and so on. So now, what does it mean to speak about the practice of philosophy or doing politics in an age of pluralism, right? And I think is a larger intellectual challenge that I think somewhere Taylor is also placing before us. And I think some of these questions we'll come back to later in the course of my exposition of Taylor's work, because there are issues involved here, and I'll get back to them as we go along. Is that okay, Amrutraj?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Any other doubts or clarifications? Okay, so let me move ahead with Taylor's idea of contextualized self-interpretations, right? Okay, now, and as I say in my handout, that when even as Taylor is highlighting certain interesting possibilities for interpretive social science, it is important to recognize that Taylor is emphasizing the way he is because he also wants to avoid or move beyond some common misapprehensions. In fact, these are his words, misapprehensions about interpretive social science, right? And in his essay on understanding and ethnocentricity, he actually speaks about certain common misconceptions or misapprehensions about interpretive social science, right? The first misapprehension, according to him, and this is a very interesting one, is that interpretation demands empathy with our subjects, right, etc. And Taylor is clearly saying that look, there is more to interpretive social science than just empathy with our subjects, right? With the human agents whose actions we are trying to interpret. Of course, he's not denying that empathy is necessary, right? He's not denying that empathy can be useful in arriving at understanding, right? But he insists that understanding is more than just empathy, right? I mean, I quote his lines, it is not what empathy, it is not, I mean, empathy is not quite what understanding consists in, right? Okay. In fact, it's one thing to understand an action. It's quite another to draw out its significance, right? And according to Taylor, science, right, as a form of discourse, right, okay, must provide an account which outlines the significance of action and situation. So it's not just enough to understand an action, right, in which case you work with the agent's point of view, right, but in drawing out the significance of that action, you have to actually move beyond the agent's point of view, etc. Right? So empathy, right? That understanding or interpretation, demands empathy with our subjects. So yes, understanding, interpretation demands empathy, but there is more to understanding than just empathizing with our subjects of inquiry, right? In fact, it is in this context, and I'll come back to this point later, right, that Taylor argues that within social science or an interpretive social science, what we are looking for is the right language, okay, in which to draw out the significance of a situation or of an action, right? I mean, so it's not just addressing the significance of an action or a situation. It's also, I mean, turning out, right, or giving an, comprehending it and expressing it in the right language, right, in which you make clear what is the significance of the situation and so on. Okay. In fact, Taylor, in speaking of this right language, and these are his words, right language, he's speaking actually of a language of perspicuous contrast, right? And I'll come back to that presently, right? And I mean, because that's a technical word, language of perspicuous contrast, and these are his words, and I think it demands some attention. But the language of perspicuous contrast, this right language that Taylor is emphasizing, is part of his attempt to point out that understanding in social science, interpretation in the context of social science, while it does demand empathy, understanding, interpretation has more dimensions to it than just understanding, than just empathy, and so on. So the significance of an action will have to be addressed, and in approximating to that significance, also communicating it with the right language, in which you can make clear both the action, the situation, and the significance of the action, and so on. So Taylor is pointing out and forwarding the claims for a contextualized self-interpretations in order to avoid this common misapprehension that interpretive social science is only about empathizing with our subjects. There is more to understanding and interpretation than just empathy with our subjects. The second misapprehension, and is really about the incorrigibility thesis, right? And what is the incorrigibility thesis? That understanding involves taking the agent's point of view, right? The point of view of the agent, right? In fact, Taylor has pointed out that, reducing interpretive social science to merely the agent's point of view is to make social science rather unilluminating or banal or commonplace. Although, there is something problematic in this, and I think our discussions that we had illustrated that, but I'll get back to some critical points, rehearsing some of this a little later. But Taylor is pointing out that in speaking about contextualized self-interpretations in the way that he does, he's actually trying to move beyond some of these common misapprehensions about interpretive social science, right? Now I think it's important, therefore, to get into this this added energy that Taylor is postulating, or an added demand that Taylor is placing upon social science, that in going beyond the agent's point of view, in both mastering and going beyond the agent's point of view, okay, Taylor explicitly borrows from the philosopher Gadamer idea, and I'm not going to go into Gadamer here, but I'm only focusing on the borrowal, right? Taylor borrows from the philosopher Gadamer the idea of the fusion of horizons, right? And argues that a fusion of horizons is necessary to develop a language of perspicuous contrast that I have just indicated, which can serve as the basis for interpretive social science. So there are some technical words here, right language, language of perspicuous contrast, and fusion of horizons, right, etc. Okay, and and that's why, instead of trying to explicate what these terminologies, these borrowals imply, I have a long quotation from Taylor, which is there in the handout that has been given to you, which summarizes this idea, right? Okay, but let me just take you through that quote and then elaborate on this quote in the next class, right? The language of perspicuous contrast, and the idea of strong evaluation, and so on, that I will take up in the next class. But let me just take you through the quote and give you those clarificatory points as I run along with you with the quote. And I'm quoting Taylor. In fact, Taylor is here clarifying his idea of perspicuous contrast, the language of perspicuous contrast. In fact, it will almost always be the case, as Taylor says, that the adequate language in which we can understand another society is not our language of understanding or theirs, right? Okay, but rather what one would call a language of perspicuous contrast. So it's one thing to understand a society on its own terms. It's quite another to understand a society on our terms. But what the language of perspicuous contrast does, is that there is more to understanding a society than adopting its own terms or adopting our terms to understand it. But there is something else. There is some other space in which we can begin to address and interpret the other, another society, and so on, right? So that's why he says, in fact, it will almost always be the case that the adequate language in which we can understand another society is not our language of understanding or their language of understanding, but rather what one will call the language of perspicuous contrast. And then he goes on, right? So you can clearly see that the language of perspicuous contrast is neither adopting, right, an ethnocentric viewpoint, our point of view, or adopting their point of view, but somewhere trying to speak differently about the other, right, etc. Okay, and then Taylor clarifies, this would be a language, the language of perspicuous contrast would be a language in which we could formulate both their way of life, and ours as alternative possibilities, in relation to some human constants at work in both, right? Again, somebody might say, again, Taylor is being too idealistic here, right? I mean, he's speaking about certain human constants, certain, and that and that there are, these human constants operate in every society, and so on. Okay, but let's keep the idealism point aside and just listen to Taylor in terms of what he's arguing as the language of perspicuous contrast. So the language of perspicuous contrast is a language in which we could formulate both their way of life and our way of life as alternative possibilities, right, in relation to certain human constants at work in both. I mean, the human constant could be that there are people, that they have interests, and they profess, they can profess the kind of values that they do. These are constants, human constants, and that they're always trying to maximize their own advantages, etc. And in the context of these, that people live in a place, there is a demography, there is a geography. I mean, these are human constants at work, right? In any context, right? And Taylor is saying that in trying to address that context, there could be a language of perspicuous contrast that we could bring, which we could formulate both their way of life and our way of life as alternative possibilities, and so on, right? So, and then he goes further. The language of perspicuous contrast would be a language in which human variations, possible human variations, would be so formulated that both our form of life and theirs could be described, perspicuously described as alternative such variations, right? So that our way of life and their way of life are variations on the possibilities of life, right? Etc. So he's not prejudging other ways of life. Okay, he's saying that other ways of life has claims to our attention, just as our way of life has claims to attention, etc. And such a language of contrast might show that their language might show, this is important, such a language of contrast might show that their language of understanding is distorted or inadequate in some respects, and it might show ours, okay, to be so distorted and inadequate in some other respects, etc. Right? Okay, and once we have such a state of affairs, right, where we don't privilege one language over the other, our language over others, or their language over us, and that there could be something right in their language and there could be something right in our language, and there could be something wrong in their language and there could be something wrong in our language, then such a language of contrast might show, can actually lead to a form of understanding which alters, according to Taylor, our self-understanding, right? Okay, so it's quite possible that through a language of perspicuous contrast, understanding them, okay, can lead to or might lead to an alteration of our self-understanding, and hence our form of life, okay, and that sometimes by understanding the other, we have gained, we ourselves have, modified our self-understanding, has happened in history, right? And so on. Of course, one might argue that where is the power dimension in this language of perspicuous contrast, right? And I think for the moment, let's suspend that question, etc. And then just address Taylor for what he is affirming for our purposes, right? And the power question is an important question, and Amrutraj is right in, and Rose also was definitely hinting at that, was definitely right. But I think it's important to point out, that there is something that Taylor is urging here, which has some claim to our attention. So the language of perspicuous contrast is not just an imposition of one view over the other. It's actually taking into account a multiplicity of views and trying to mediate between multiple perspectives on reality, and then trying to approximate to a certain language in which both your self-understanding is accounted for and their self-understanding is accounted for, right? And that's why he says it can lead to an alteration of self-understanding, and because it's altering our self-understanding, our form of life can change, and this has happened in history. Right? So I mean that there is something in the language of perspicuous contrast that needs to be altered. That's why, please note, in speaking of the language of perspicuous contrast, Taylor is addressing one of these common misapprehensions about social science, that understanding involves empathy. Empathy is important, but there is more to understanding than empathy, because understanding also involves capturing the significance of matters, and significance requires also communicating it in the right language, so that we actually capture the significance of matters, and so on. Right? I'll come back to the language of perspicuous contrast in the next class, but I will stop here for the moment, and if there are any immediate clarifications, I can offer them at this point. Otherwise, we will return to it in the next class. Are there any immediate clarifications? And I will be only pleased to clarify. Okay, so I mean, if there are no questions, then I think I will just wind up the recording. And so I've just, I mean, maybe let it be part of the recording. We have decided on the second internal, which is going to be a test, which will be administered on a particular day, and that the day for the second internal, the day of the test will be 25th October. It's a Monday. It will be during our class, and and the modalities of the test are that it will have to be handwritten by all of you, and then scanned, and then uploaded within a particular span of time. Enough time will be given. Only the visually handicapped student, I think, to my knowledge, it's only Nikhil who can do type it out and upload his answer. That's fine. But the rest will have to handwrite it and then scan it and send. There will be 3 questions given. You'll have to answer 2. The test is for 25 marks, and I'll have to think through this, because it's 25 marks, etc. So how do I apportion marks? Instead of making it 12.5, etc. I will specify the breakup of marks. Okay. Indicate it in the next class. All this will be set in the next later today. I will give you the format of the test and so on. And then your second assignments are due on your first internals are due on Monday, and kindly ensure that you are submitting your assignments by Monday, and so on. Right? Okay.